Mr. President,
Senator from Oregon.
late last week, when I first scheduled this consent request that's relating to Jeffrey Epstein's bank records, I was not expecting it to be set against the backdrop of Donald Trump dragging America into yet another war in the Middle East. I'll address the horrific crimes and his worldwide financial network of Mr. Epstein in a minute. Right at the outset, I need to address the actions of the Trump administration this past weekend. This is a war the American people do not want, a war that has already cost American lives, a war the president and his scheming advisors have not even tried to justify, a war Donald Trump kicked off at his private club minutes before stepping out to celebrate at a glitzy fundraiser where attendees spent $1 million per plate. Now, I remember the debate about the Iraq War 20 years ago, including the bad faith attacks against those of us who opposed it from the start. No doubt there will be a replay of that debate. There'll be some who say war is on. It's time for everybody to line up behind the president, and every other issue's got to go by the wayside. That's wrong. It's been clear from the beginning that the core principle for this administration is that Donald Trump gets to do what he wants, no matter the cost, when he wants to. It doesn't matter to him how many American soldiers die as a result of the war. It doesn't matter how many people lose their health insurance or their livelihoods as a result of his policies. And in the case of Mr. Epstein, it doesn't matter how many pedophiles and sex traffickers continue to walk the streets and prey on the vulnerable while the Trump administration hides essential Epstein files from the public. The position of this administration is that Donald Trump can't do anything wrong. He gets to do what he wants, and everybody else has to obey. Ultimately, the American people aren't going to have it. I won't either, and that was the message of my town meetings this past weekend. The last thing that I'm going to do, Mr. President, is to slow down or walk away from our 4-year investigation into Epstein's trafficking network because Donald Trump decided to kick off another open-ended war in the Middle East. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to lay out why the Senate needs to pass my legislation demanding the release of the Epstein bank records that are at the Treasury Department. Here's what Americans need to know. 4 years ago, my investigators on the Finance Committee began digging into the so-called tax planning that Jeffrey Epstein performed for one of the titans of Wall Street. That man was Leon Black. That relationship spawned sprawling financial ties, and Black had a curious story about their relationship. Here was a guy worth billions and billions of dollars, really a money-making machine. He already employed the best tax and estate planning experts in the nation. But over the course of several years, Mr. Black paid Jeffrey Epstein $170 million for what he claimed was tax and estate planning advice. Keep in mind that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't a tax lawyer or an accountant. The rates Black paid him were astronomical compared to what he was paying the experts that he already employed. So my investigators kept digging. What we found and what's been confirmed in more recent Epstein reports is that this story is a sham. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't really doing serious tax and estate works, and Black lawyers had to keep tabs on the advice he did give, which was often shoddy. Our investigation grew. In late 2023, we reached out to the Biden Treasury Department and sought copies of the bank records that it had on Mr. Epstein. The Biden Treasury Department wouldn't give us the files, but they allowed my investigators to review them in person and to take notes. That's how, Mr. President, I'm aware today that there is a massive file of Epstein records at the Treasury Department. These are detailed bank records, a roadmap of Epstein's financial history. In fact, they're filings made by banks specifically to alert federal law enforcement to suspicious payments, evidence of possible financial crimes. They're designed to help the Treasury investigators and the Justice Department root out crimes like money laundering and trafficking. My investigators reviewed a large portion of them on Valentine's Day 2024. We learned that Jeffrey Epstein made 4,725 wire transfers, adding up to more than $1 billion in and out of his J.P. Morgan bank accounts in the decade after 2003. We learned that he moved hundreds of millions of dollars more through accounts at Bank of New York Mellon and Deutsche Bank. We learned that he used Russian correspondent bank accounts to process hundreds of millions in payments associated with trafficking in Russia and Eastern Europe. In the portion of the Epstein bank records that my investigators saw, there could be more than $1.5 billion in suspicious Epstein transactions laid out for law enforcement to review. Mr. President and colleagues, this is a staggering amount, and it is inexplicably high based on what is currently known about Epstein's sources of income. These Epstein records are not among the files the Justice Department has released over the last few months. The bill Congress passed requiring the release of the DOJ Epstein files doesn't affect the records at the Treasury Department at all. And the kicker, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is hiding these bank records from Senate investigators. The Secretary refused repeatedly to turn them over, and he has refused to let us see what we already know is there. The administration came in with a whole lot of bluster about whether they were going to release the Epstein files. So I wanted to give them a chance to make good on their word. I requested the complete set of files from the Treasury multiple times last spring and summer. Both times I got denials. Secretary Bessent has even gone out in public and downplayed their significance. He's denied Treasury's got any investigative role with the Epstein files at all. At an appearance last summer, he said the Epstein files were, quote, sitting there at the Treasury Department and that the department's job was only to collect them. He said, and I quote, there were no files per se, just hundreds and thousands of reports, and our job is simply to collect the reports. Let me be clear on this, Mr. President. Secretary Bessent is not telling the American people the truth. A person with his background in finance absolutely knows perfectly well what the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network is all about. That's the law enforcement office within the Treasury Department that collects the bank records. And the Secretary hasn't shied away from getting involved in other investigations. He's got the Treasury Department launching all kinds of efforts to help the Trump administration's deportation campaign in Minnesota. So the Secretary wants to have it both ways. When it comes to investigating people and communities the Trump administration considers to be adversaries, the Treasury Department and Mr. Bessent are totally aggressive. When it comes to investigating pedophiles with connections to Donald Trump, the files remain locked away. So let me explain why it's important to break the Bessent hold on these documents. They would help investigators learn who funded and who enabled Epstein. They'd help us see where his payments went. They'd help us identify any connections to organized crime. They'd help us learn more about Epstein's patterns. For example, how he controlled women and girls by controlling their accounts. They'd help reveal how Epstein's henchmen, including those who still control his estate, assisted in his crimes. That's the kind of information the Treasury Secretary's stranglehold on these documents is hiding from investigators. We have waited long enough. But a week ago, there was a stunning news report that prompted my decision to come to the Senate floor with the unanimous consent request I'll make today. CBS News reported on the existence of a mystery Epstein investigation going back to 2010, an investigation the public knew nothing about until now. It was spearheaded by the Drug Enforcement Administration, and its targets were Epstein and 14 others. It dealt with drug trafficking and money laundering in New York and the Virgin Islands. The existence of this probe was revealed by a long memorandum prepared by one of the law enforcement agencies involved. That's an agency that specialized in breaking up transnational organized crime. Most of the 69-page memo is redacted, but the outlines are there. This was a major investigation that began in 2010 and ran at least into 2015. So now I'm working on obtaining an unredacted copy of this memorandum from the Drug Enforcement Agency. There's no reason for the Trump administration to withhold it. It literally says, Mr. President, it says unclassified at the top of every page. I've got several other questions about the investigation's conclusion and its findings. One obvious takeaway is that the Senate cannot allow the Treasury Secretary to keep the Epstein bank records hidden any longer. The evidence out in public is clear. This wasn't some small-time operation run by Epstein and Maxwell. It's a miscarriage of justice that they're the only two persons who faced prosecution in the U.S. Epstein's network spanned the globe. It involved extraordinarily powerful and wealthy people. It involved serious financial crimes and huge flows of money. And now, based on the revelation of a Drug Enforcement Agency investigation, we now know, as we stand here today, it may have involved drugs and drug cartels. A Treasury Secretary and an administration that was interested in justice would have a team of highly skilled investigators digging through the Epstein bank records to assist with prosecutions. Instead, Mr. Bessent, Pam Bondi, the entire Trump group in Congress, in the administration, is covering up for pedophiles, sex traffickers, and quite possibly drug cartels. If they're not going to do any investigating, Mr. President, the Senate ought to be able to step in. That's what my bill is all about. It mandates that the Treasury turn over these Epstein bank records to Senate investigators. We'll do the job the Trump administration should have started on day one. And there's an important new reason to pass the bill. There's a lot of Epstein-related news, Mr. President, that breaks nearly every day. I'd wager that a lot of banks where Epstein and his network did business are following the news, maybe following this discussion, and they're taking a second look at his transactions. It's entirely possible that there are new bank filings coming in today, and they're flagging a new set of suspicious transactions that deserve investigation. The Treasury Secretary is blocking that investigation from happening. Before I wrap up, Mr. President, I just want to note this. I first sought these documents in 2023, and that was under a Democratic administration. I requested copies of them again in 2024 after my investigators reviewed a portion of them in person at the Treasury Department. I'm still frustrated that the Biden administration didn't provide them. So nobody has a right to claim that we didn't come out on this issue in a bipartisan way. My investigation will move forward in other directions as well. I continue to believe that some of the biggest banks on Wall Street were among Epstein's biggest enablers. JP Morgan, BNY Mellon, Deutsche Bank, and others had opportunity after opportunity to blow the whistle, and they just, Mr. President, kept looking the other way. These aren't itty-bitty banks in Utah or Oregon, Mr. President. These were big Wall Street banks, and they looked the other way. Particularly in the case of JP Morgan, the evidence shows they knew what Epstein was up to, and they looked the other way because he brought in mountains of cash. They waited until after he died to flag more than 99% of his suspicious payments. By then, it was too late to do any good in terms of stopping him. So now Congress must change the rules, and I intend to push this, Mr. President, to make sure that this kind of bank reporting to prevent this kind of horrendous situation where so many young women and families were hurt. I'm going to make sure this situation doesn't happen again. There's a lot more to come from my investigation. From the beginning, I've welcomed participation from both sides. That still stands. And my colleagues here in the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, know that my door is open to all of them. We're going to stay at it until we have all the facts, because they're not blue and red. And then I'm going to have a major reform effort so the Wall Street banks can never, never, never hurt the American people the way they have by handling the Epstein investigation. I strongly hope my colleagues will support my request to pass my bill to produce Epstein Treasury Records Act. There is no excuse for the Secretary of Treasury to continue blocking our access to the Epstein bank records. So therefore, Mr. President, notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Finance be discharged from further consideration of S. 2746, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, that the Wyden substitute amendment, which is at the desk, be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended be considered, read a third time, and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
The Senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, there's no debate that Jeffrey Epstein's crimes of sexual abuses and other crimes are appalling. And the investigation there is ongoing must focus on bringing those who participated to justice. The Justice Department already has been tasked and has tasked about 500 lawyers to publicly release over 3 million pages, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos in response to President Trump having signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act into law on November 19, 2025. According to one New York Times article, the current pile of pages would reach to the top of the Empire State Building. Since the House of Representatives took the lead on moving the Epstein Files Transparency Act, it is not surprising that the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform and the House Judiciary Committee are now leading the congressional review of the millions of pages of documents from the Justice Department. The House Oversight Committee is particularly busy reviewing documents relating to corporate, nonprofit, academic, and governmental entities with known or alleged ties to Epstein's web of financial networks that were turned over by the U.S. Justice Department on January 31, along with documents turned over earlier by the Epstein estate. The House Oversight Committee also specifically requested these Treasury documents that have been talked about here today from the Department of Treasury, and requested that the department provide all suspicious activities reports, or SARs, and accompanying material filed relating to the investigation and prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein for its independent review. That's these very files that the Treasury Department was asked to release and provide. Treasury replied that it would fully cooperate with the committee and that it will work alongside other relevant federal agencies to deliver on the request as thoroughly as possible. The subpoenas, depositions, and SAR requests made between the two House committees are part of a very robust investigatory process, one which deals with massive amounts of information and patterns of activity collected over a 20-year period. The Finance Committee has one of the broadest committee jurisdictions in the Senate. But it is the Banking Committee, not the Finance Committee, which has specific subject matter jurisdiction over bank suspicious activity reports and a more particular expertise with reading and handling of those documents. At this stage, while the House committees are pursuing the same exact information from the same agencies, and the agencies have agreed by law passed in the House and Senate to release those materials, it would not be helpful for either the Senate Finance or the Senate Banking Committee to confound the process by attempting to duplicate or compete with their work. while adding more stress to the department struggling to keep up with the pace of congressional demands. Mr. President, for these reasons, I object to my colleague's request.
President,
Objection is heard. The senator from Oregon.
I'm going to be very brief. First of all, as my colleague knows, we are talking about a different set of files. I'm concerned about the Treasury Department. What my colleague is talking about is essentially the Justice Department. And what is needed here is more investigations rather than less. And nobody has the expertise that we have on the Senate Finance Committee. The Treasury Secretary knows that. And that's why his strategy is just to slow walk this. He's just hoping this disappears. Well, I have said at home, I said it again at a town hall meeting, I want everybody to know we're not going anywhere on this. We're going to stay at it until all the information comes out. We're going to have a bank reform proposal. My colleague is on the banking committee. I look forward to him seeing my bank reform proposal because these Wall Street banks behaved abominably. They saw what was going on. I happen to think one of the reasons they did it is because they liked the fact that Epstein was giving them referrals. So my colleague and I agree on a number of issues. Pharmaceutical benefit managers would be one, but we couldn't disagree more on this. And until the slow walking ends, the investigation that I've launched, and it's taken place over 4 years and has blown the whistle on a lot of important steps, it's the beginning. We'll stay at it until we've got real reform, and I yield the floor.
President,
Senator from Idaho.
just to make one quick clarification. I'm not just talking about the Justice Department. The Treasury Department has agreed to release the exact files that have been demanded and has said that they will provide them as thoroughly and as quickly as possible to the House Oversight Committee.
Senator from Oregon.
We'll make this really brief. I've made a number of requests specifically for the information that my colleague has now described as something that's going to come out. I'll believe it when I see it. What I do know is the Treasury Department has stonewalled us every single day through the Trump administration. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, I rise today as the Senate puts small business first in America's innovation program and gives them the certainty they need to build and grow. For too long, our nation's seed fund programs, SBIR and STTR, have been allowed to prioritize a few large companies over truly small businesses. Until now, these programs receive blank checks to squander tax dollars meant to advance innovation in our national interest and have not protected taxpayer-funded technologies from foreign influence. When confronted with this unacceptable status quo, I knew Congress could work together to find a solution for our truly small businesses. After working across the aisle and with our small businesses, we now have the necessary reforms to strengthen America's seed fund while unleashing small businesses to deliver for taxpayers and our warfighters. Together, our bipartisan, bicameral legislation will ensure awardees safeguard tech against Chinese espionage, hold recipients accountable to actually producing cutting-edge technologies and capabilities, no more blank checks, require for the first time an annual limit on applications to prioritize truly small businesses over large companies who know how to game the system, establish the first of its kind strategic breakthrough awards, and finally, provide taxpayers with transparency into who receives these awards. These changes were necessary and worth taking the time to absolutely get it right. And tonight, I am proud the Senate is unanimously passing these long overdue updates for innovators. And at this time, I would like to yield the floor to my ranking member on the Small Business Committee, Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. President. I am so happy to come to the floor today to reopen the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs. These programs deliver more than $4 billion to thousands of innovative small businesses across our country every single year. But for nearly 5 months, these programs have been shuttered. That never should have happened. In September, I came to the Senate floor seeking unanimous consent to pass H.R. 5100, a bipartisan bill sponsored by the chairs and ranking members of the Small Business Committee and House Science and Technology Committee to temporarily extend these programs while negotiations continued. Unfortunately, my motion was blocked and the programs abruptly shut down. As a result, the smallest SBIR and STTR companies were hurt. Important research and development was stalled and jobs were lost. While I'm glad to have come to an agreement, I am disappointed at the suffering that was caused by the longest shutdown in the program's history. But we did ultimately come to an agreement. That's what we bring to the floor here today. More than 40 years ago, Congress created the SBIR program to serve 4 purposes. 1, stimulate economic innovation. 2, use America's small businesses to meet federal research and development needs. 3, to foster and encourage participation by minority and disadvantaged individuals in innovation. And 4, to increase private sector commercialization from federal research and development. 10 years later, Congress created the STTR program to promote collaborations between small businesses and research institutions. And since the creation of the SBIR and STTR program, 33,000 American small businesses have won more than $77 billion in awards. In my own home state of Massachusetts, more than $9 billion in SBIR and STTR funding has been won by more than 2,600 small businesses in Massachusetts. It's been the engine of growth out on our tech belt. The SBIR, STTR programs have been overwhelmingly successful in supporting innovative small businesses and their technologies. This is just great news here. Data shows that 60% of all awardees in the past 5 years are first-time winners. The SBIR program has returned anywhere from $22 to $33 for every $1 spent by the program that's pushed into our economy. And through SBIR and STTR funding, small businesses have created cutting-edge, life-saving medical breakthroughs. In fact, this is an unbelievable number. 1 out of every 8 FDA-approved drugs is linked to the SBIR and STTR programs. SBIR funding ultimately led to the creation of a drug to treat COVID-19 infections, a medication that treats HIV infections, new treatments for Alzheimer's disease, a continuous glucose monitoring device for type 1 diabetics, and even the world's smallest heart pump, SBIR, STTR. These programs have also led to the creation of technologies we take for granted, such as GPS, wireless communication systems, and even self-automated vacuum cleaners. Simply put, the benefits of the SBIR and STTR programs touch our lives far more than most people realize. It has unleashed a cornucopia of innovation that now is a part of every American family's lives. And we must keep this program funded and going. The American people deserve to have access to the most innovative technologies. Our brave men and women who defend our freedom deserve to be equipped with the best available technology to keep themselves and all of us at home safe, as Senator Ernst said. Our family and our friends who are battling illnesses deserve access to the most effective breakthrough treatments that innovation can offer. For the federal government to continue investing in the most innovative technologies, SBIR and STTR funding must continue to be based purely on the strength of an idea, the best ideas which our country has. That's the spirit of Darwinian paranoia-inducing competition, which is the heart of our system in our country. So now, after 5 months of the program's lapse, I am proud that the chair and I have negotiated a bipartisan agreement that does not automatically eliminate any small business from the program. Unlike previous proposals that would have automatically kicked out more than 50 successful small businesses across 20 states and severely curtailed hundreds of small businesses, this reauthorization would allow small businesses to continue innovating and creating groundbreaking technology for our country. In an attempt to preserve quality proposals, this legislation requires each agency with an SBIR and STTR program to place a ceiling on the number of proposals that any small business can submit. This ceiling must be placed in one of three categories. One, a proposed limit per fiscal year. Two, a proposal limit per solicitation. Or three, a proposal limit per topic. This language provides agencies the flexibility to administer these programs in a manner that best promotes innovation. And I recently met with agency officials across the administration, including at the Pentagon, to ensure this language would not hinder the development of cutting-edge technologies to protect our country. I received assurances from the Pentagon, the largest awarding SBIR, STTR agency, that the provision would be implemented on a per-topic basis and no company would be unfairly targeted. That means that every small business can take their best shot at solving any problem the government, the NIH, the Defense Department poses, and agencies can secure the most innovative solutions. And I'm going to continue to hold this administration accountable and fight to maintain the merit-based nature of these programs, because this reauthorization also includes several new improvements for the SBIR and STTR communities. The bill retains the bipartisan 2022 Foreign Due Diligence Program, which requires agencies to create a process to communicate with small businesses if they've been flagged for a foreign risk, and explicitly ends the blacklisting of companies. This transparency measure allows small businesses the opportunity to address any foreign risks they pose, likely unknown to them. Two, the grants direct to Phase 2 authority to the Department of Energy and National Aeronautics and Space Administration. This will fast-track clean and cutting-edge technology. Three, the bill preserves STTR program funding for universities and research institutions. The bill 4 directs agencies to train contracting officers so that SBIR, STTR technologies can more effectively transition to commercialization. And 5, allows any unused fiscal year 2026 funding to be carried over so that no SBIR or STTR funding is lost as a result of the program's lapse. Therefore, that funding can be used next year. And finally, the bill reauthorizes the program until 2031, giving some stability, some reliability, some certainty to small businesses, which they need after a tumultuous 5 months. Throughout this process, I knew that any agreement had to have broad support. And that is why it was so important to get input from all stakeholders and receive assurances from the implementing agencies. So while this legislation does not include every improvement I would like to see or make programs permanent, it is a bipartisan product that resulted from a negotiation between the chair and myself as the ranking member. And the agreement now immediately reopens the programs so that we can once again stake our position on the world stage, empowering our most nimble companies in our country and our nimble allies around the world in the innovation ecosystem to partner with our brilliant small businesses to make the technological breakthroughs that put us at the cutting edge of world leadership. So I thank you, Mr. President, and I thank you, Madam Chair, for our work together. And with that, I yield back.
Wonderful. Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S3971, which is at the desk.
The clerk will report.
S3971, a bill to extend the SBIR and STTR programs and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed on the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time.
Without objection.
I know of no further debate on the bill.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, the question is on passage of the bill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is passed.
I ask unanimous consent that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I understand that there is a bill at the desk, and I ask for its first reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
S3977, a bill to amend Title 11 United States Code and so forth and for other purposes.
I now ask for a second reading, and in order to place the bill on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I object to my own request.
Objection is heard. The bill will be read for the second time in the next legislative day.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 3377, which was received from the House.
Clerk will report.
H.R. 3377, an act to authorize the President to award the Medal of Honor to James Capers, Jr. for acts of valor as a member of the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Armed Services Committee be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 7194 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 7194, an act to authorize the President to award the Medal of Honor to Nicholas Dockery for acts of valor as a member of the Army while serving in Afghanistan.
Without objection, the committee is discharged, and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Armed Services Committee be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 7211 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report.
H.R. 7211, an act to authorize the President to award the Medal of Honor to John W. Ripley for acts of valor during the Vietnam War and for other purposes.
Without objection, the committee is discharged, and the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it will stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Wednesday, March 4th, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, morning business be closed, and the Senate resume consideration of the motion to proceed to H.R. 6644, post-cloture, and at 11 a.m., all time be expired, and the Senate vote on the motion to proceed. Further, if Senator Kane makes a motion to discharge S.J. Res. 104, the Senate vote on the motion at 4 p.m.
Without objection.
If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order, following the remarks of Senator Klobuchar.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I join many of my colleagues today in mourning the loss of our service members who have been killed in action in the Mideast and thinking of those who have been wounded. Their sacrifice is a tragic reminder of the gravity of war and why the consequential decision of declaring war requires debate and authorization from Congress. We must pass Senator Kane's resolution, which we will be considering tomorrow, to rein in the president. Because under the U.S. Constitution, it is Congress, not the president, who has the power to declare war. But the president, unilaterally, with no authorization from Congress, and without a clear justification of any imminent need for war, has gone to war with Iran. And he's done so without laying out a strategic plan or a path forward. This military campaign has put American troops at serious risk, and we have publicly learned, in addition to the classified briefing that I attended today with the Secretary of State and the Secretary of War and the Director of the CIA, we have learned publicly that this is escalating. And we have seen the results even so far. American service members and innocent civilians have been killed. U.S. military bases have been hit. Our embassies and allies have been attacked. To be clear, Iran is a terrorist state and should never have a nuclear weapon, and the regime's aggression in the region and repression of Iranian citizens must end. That's why I have long supported serious sanctions against Iran, why I have voted for funding for the Defense Department, and why I supported the Iran nuclear agreement. While it wasn't perfect, far from perfect, but I supported that agreement because of our goal, our major foreign policy goal, to assure that Iran did not have a nuclear weapon. I opposed President Trump's decision a few years back to take us out of that agreement, and even some of my colleagues who had not voted for the agreement to begin with, which I had, did not support the decision of taking us out of the agreement. Our ultimate goal must be peace in the region, and we know all too well that wars for regime change can lead to unintended consequences for years and decades to come. And as we see what is happening, we believe, many of us, that Congress should have this ultimate authorization. And not having a plan is not only dangerous for the U.S., it is dangerous for our partners and our allies abroad. This military campaign has introduced increased chaos and danger throughout the region. Military action of this size and scope must be paired with a plan that takes into account the long-term impacts of war and sets achievable goals that do not unnecessarily endanger our troops and innocents. That is not what is happening here. The president has acknowledged that they do not have a clear plan of who will be taking over this nation of tens of millions of people. That is why I'm on the Senate floor today. The American people don't want another war, an endless war that puts our troops at great risk. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this resolution and stand up for the institution in which we serve and stand up for the people that we represent. I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. President.